Welcome to the Chill Reel. Here are 5 true terrifying stories that are sure to give you nightmares. Story number 1. Aunt's House. When I was a teenager, I used to visit my aunt's house often. Her house was old and creaky, and there was always an eerie feeling about it. One day, my aunt told me a story about the previous owner of the house. The previous owner was a man who lived alone and was known to be a recluse. He died in the house and his body was not discovered for several weeks. When the authorities finally found him, they discovered that his body had started to decompose and emit a foul odor. After his death, strange things started to happen in the house. Doors would open and close on their own, and objects would move without any explanation. My aunt told me that she often heard footsteps coming from upstairs when she was home alone. One day, I was in the house alone and I decided to explore the upstairs. As I walked up the stairs, I felt a chill run down my spine. When I got to the top of the stairs, I saw a figure standing in the hallway. It was the shape of a man, but I couldn't make out any details as it was shrouded in darkness. I froze in fear and the figure just stood there, staring at me. After what felt like an eternity, I mustered up the courage to run back down the stairs and out of the house. To this day, I still get goosebumps thinking about that experience. My aunt eventually moved out of the house and it has since been demolished. But the memory of that ghostly figure will always stay with me. Story number 2. Shortcut. Before I began, let me start by saying, this story has been told in variations for many years, even as an urban legend. But this is no story. One late night, a woman was driving home from work. She was taking a shortcut through a remote, wooded area to save time. As she was driving along, she noticed a woman standing on the side of the road, hitchhiking. The woman looked normal at first glance, but something about her made the driver feel uneasy. The driver slowed down and asked the woman if she needed a ride. The woman got in the car, and they started driving. The driver tried to make small talk, but the hitchhiker didn't say much. As they continued on their journey, the driver noticed that the hitchhiker was staring straight ahead, not looking around or reacting to anything. Eventually, the driver tried to strike up a conversation again, asking the hitchhiker where she needed to be dropped off. But the hitchhiker didn't respond, and the driver turned to look at her. To her horror, the driver realized that the hitchhiker had disappeared without a trace. The driver was understandably shaken and pulled over to the side of the road. As she sat there, trying to make sense of what had just happened, she noticed a graveyard nearby. She later found out that the hitchhiker she had picked up matched the description of a woman who had died in a car accident in that area many years ago. From that night on, the driver always avoided that shortcut through the woods, and she never picked up another hitchhiker again. Story number 3. The Old House. My friend, let's call her Sarah, moved into an old Victorian-style house with her family when she was a teenager. The house had a long history, having been owned by several families over the years. Sarah's family didn't think much of the history, and they were excited to move into such a beautiful old home. However, as soon as they moved in, strange things started happening. The first thing Sarah noticed was that she felt like she was being watched, especially when she was alone in the house. She also heard strange noises, like footsteps and creaking floorboards, when nobody else was home. Her younger brother even claimed to have seen a shadowy figure in his room at night. Sarah's parents were skeptical at first, but they eventually began to experience strange occurrences themselves. One night, while they were all sitting in the living room watching TV, they heard the sound of someone walking up the stairs. They assumed it was Sarah's brother, but when they looked up, they saw a misty, white figure floating up the stairs instead. From that point on, the ghostly presence in the house seemed to become more active. Sarah would wake up in the middle of the night to find her bed shaking, and her parents reported hearing strange whispers and laughter coming from empty rooms. Despite their fear, Sarah's family continued to live in the house for several years. Eventually, they decided to have the house blessed by a priest, which seemed to calm things down for a while. However, Even years later, Sarah still says she can sometimes feel a strange presence around her, and she still gets chills when she thinks back to her time in that old Victorian-style house. If you're enjoying yourself so far, please hit the like and subscribe button, and help our channel grow. Story number 4. The Haunted Asylum. Maggie had always been curious about the abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. It had been closed for years, but rumors of strange happenings had circulated for as long as she could remember. One day, while exploring the woods with her friends, they stumbled upon the overgrown entrance to the asylum. Against her better judgment, Maggie convinced her friends to follow her inside. As they explored the dark corridors, strange noises echoed throughout the empty halls. Maggie's friends became nervous and started to suggest they leave, but Maggie was too intrigued. They came across a room with a strange symbol etched into the floor. As they looked closer, they heard a sound coming from the next room. When they opened the door, they found a wheelchair with no one in it, slowly rolling towards them. As they tried to escape, they found themselves trapped in a room with no way out. The ghost appeared before them, her eyes glowing with anger. Maggie realized that the only way to save herself and her friends was to perform a ritual to lay the ghost to rest. With shaking hands, she followed the instructions she had found in a book on the floor, and the ghost disappeared. Maggie and her friends stumbled out of the asylum, shaken but alive. They never spoke of the experience again, but they knew that they had been lucky to escape. The asylum remained closed, but some say that they can still hear the ghost cries echoing through the halls. Maggie knew that she had opened a door that she could never close, and she would always wonder what other horrors lay waiting in the abandoned asylum. Story number 5. The Old Mansion. The old mansion on the outskirts of town had always been a mystery to the locals. They whispered stories of how it had been abandoned for years, ever since the last resident had died under mysterious circumstances. No one knew exactly what had happened, but the rumors were enough to keep people away. But when Samantha and her friends dared each other to spend a night inside the mansion, she couldn't resist. She had always been fascinated by the unknown and the supernatural. They snuck in through a broken window and settled down in the dusty living room, with nothing but a flashlight to keep them company. As the night wore on, strange things began to happen. Shadows danced across the walls, whispers echoed through the halls, and doors creaked open on their own. Samantha tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, but deep down, she knew there was something else in the mansion with them. The next morning, Samantha's friends were gone. She searched the mansion from top to bottom, but there was no sign of them anywhere. Fear began to gnaw at her as she realized she was all alone in the mansion. But that was just the beginning of her terror. As the day turned into night, the mansion came alive with supernatural activity. Ghostly figures appeared in the hallways, their eyes gleaming with malevolence. Samantha tried to run, but the mansion seemed to shift and change, trapping her inside. The mansion shook and trembled, and Samantha felt the supernatural forces lift from her. She stumbled out of the mansion, free at last. Samantha never spoke of her ordeal in the mansion to anyone. She tried to move on with her life, but the memories haunted her every waking moment. She couldn't shake the feeling that the supernatural forces were still watching her, waiting for her to slip up and fall back into their grasp. So, there you have it. 5 truly disturbing tales of terror. Thank you for watching.